than it is to tell a professor, a tutor that you're working with, an advisor, because it is such a psychological task to be able to bring that up without having all of the baggage that comes along with it. And so I think AI has a tremendous ability to be an equalizer for those students so that they can get some additional help. But you really do need some of those basic pieces, like making sure that you're getting the notes out from your course, making sure that you're able to cooperate with peers, have conversations with teachers. So it cannot replace, but it really is an augmenting and an equalizing space to be able to utilize AI the way you need it to work for your learning style, for your brain, regardless if you have a disability or not.
I think one of the most powerful things that an institution can do is to get their center for students with disabilities, or equivalently named center, to present regularly to parts of the university to show what students are currently doing and what students are asking for. So these units typically have a really clear idea of the gaps and where students are asking or experimenting with new tools. And also then the second part is to provide those units with additional funds so they can experiment. Because again, they're at the tip of the spear. They're working with folks who are trying new things that faculty and other students may not be aware of. And if you can share that information, I think it becomes a more powerful environment. So I come from a web usability background. And one of the things that used to frustrate me is we would position people with disabilities as the other. These were things that we need to fix for this sort of small select group. But the trick is, if you're able to create affordances for that population, it transforms the experience for everyone. It makes everything better for everyone. So it's not like there's a small group of people that we need to do things differently for. No, there's a small group of people who have knowledge that if we address, it's going to transform the environment for everyone. And we should sort of embrace them and listen to them. And AI is the way that we can do that now.
Yeah, here. I think it's really interesting, the way that Amanda, you were talking about how you'd use that sort of GPT interface as a way to coach answers or information out of you to help frame it in a way you might not have thought about things before. I think it's really interesting to look at how AI can support better critical thinking, not diminish it. And I guess the question off the back of that is, how do you design AI integrated assignments to ensure they cultivate rather than diminish? I guess the question off the back of that is, how do you design AI integrated assignments to ensure they cultivate rather than diminish students' critical thinking and problem solving skills?
I actually was going to ask you that question, Josh, because as an engineer and as part of your, and I know this isn't a product pitch, but, and I apologize, Amanda, I think I interrupted you.
No, please go.
But what Amanda actually brought up is this conversation with my notes. So when back in the day when I was in school, we would have study groups and we would have conversations about our notes. So what'd you take? What did you understand? I didn't get this. I didn't understand that. There's now an opportunity to have that conversation with an objective agent, AI agent. Is that something that you've been thinking about, Josh, as Genio? And how does that work? Like, how do you vision that, if that even is something?
Yeah, I mean, no product, spoilers in this webinar, sadly. But it's a really good question. I think ultimately, we really care about productive friction in the learning process. We really care about ensuring that learning actually happens instead of trying to shortcut really critical parts of that learning process. So we would never automatically generate your notes for you. We're not interested in trying to shortcut note creation, for example, because we understand that there's power in honing and refining your notes, and what comes out the back of that is really valuable. But we do believe in sort of automating things that are not valuable in that way, things that are just sort of efficiency blockers, or things that are sort of admin-based things that don't really provide value to the learning process. So we're looking across our products how we can use AI to generate multiple choice quizzes off the content that you've already created, off your notes, or off things that you've recorded, and also just looking at how we can maybe provide outlines of that note content to help give you summaries of things that you've already put into our tools. But we don't believe in the note generation for you. We think that's a really critical part of the process, and that principle applies across all of our products. So we believe in productive friction, and we don't want to remove that from our products. Hopefully that sort of clarifies the question.
And I love the productive friction,
Mhm.
because learning has never been easy. It shouldn't be easy because it's your brain accommodating for new information. But now we're doing it in a way where maybe like a large language model makes it look easy, but that large language model is just a master predictor of information that already exists in the web. And so we don't want to base like, man, AI was able to come up with this so quickly, I don't need to know this information. Like, you have to have that productive friction for people to learn. And so as I'm in the classroom, it really is a challenge because, again, I grew up in a space where AI didn't exist, and some of these assignments like writing a paper, and John mentioned this, it's a struggle to get that fluidly going from beginning to end, but the mental lift that you get from writing and putting your thoughts onto paper and then going back and editing and making sure it's streamlined, like, that is a lot of learning. And so what do you do to balance the fact that this is something that AI does really easily, that people may want to shut their brain off to it because they don't recognize how important that productive friction is? And so with my students each year or each term, when we start, we talk a bit. I'm going to start calling it productive friction. That's not how I address it, but it's this idea of you have to pay the price to be able to leave an expert from this class. And yes, there are things that you're going to be able to fudge with AI, but as you fudge with AI, you're really cutting yourself short. And it's a different, maybe it's the same discussion, but with a lot more threats to it than used to exist when we were all going through school.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the challenges with Gen AI, right? It's almost cheapened the creative task of creating anything in the first place. And I think that's something, productive friction is super important to go through as a process. Sorry, James, I'm about to jump in and chip in there.
No, I just wanted to add that the two most powerful parts of learning are reflection and presentation. And reflection typically happens outside of the classroom. So one of the ways I think that students can use generative AI to sort of improve reflection is talking to your AI. So most of these systems have a voice assistant. And I think there's a great amount of power there if you turn on guided learning and just talk to your assistant and try and present to your assistant and listen to the feedback. And then you bring that learning that's taking place outside of the classroom back into the classroom. So the interesting thing is, we're talking about efficiency. Sometimes the thing that's most important at learning is being inefficient. If we think about efficiency, those are typically the things that we don't enjoy. The things that we enjoy are where we become inefficient. If you love cooking, you spend hours doing inefficient things to make a marvelous meal. If you love painting, you spend hours being inefficient to do something that you could take a photograph with a camera. So one of the things that's really resonating with me is where people say, whatever you love, don't use artificial intelligence for that. Use artificial intelligence for the painful things that don't add value, that you hate. So it's an interesting dichotomy, this sort of inefficiency versus, less efficiency.